the most signal to me exists in the places where people are using Bitcoin come hell or high water, where it's just their money of choice at this point. What I focus most on is grassroots adoption around the world, across Africa, Latin America, where people were adopting Bitcoin despite whatever the price was. It's not even about Bitcoin, to be honest. It just gives me hope that human beings can come up with really creative ways to solve their problems. While the Overton window on privacy is beginning to shift, it has not shifted very far, and I wouldn't say there are many privacy advocates in government. Like Bitcoin, it's just the embodiment of punk rock in terms of money. For it to succeed, of course, it can't remain a countercultural thing. But the same way that certain ethos is thou shalt not kill, basic rules of religions will be passed along. I think those things are sort of embedded in Bitcoin's code and deep down embedded in the culture. People won't even realize that it's kind of being imprinted in them. Their life will change because they're using better money. They'll start making different decisions and they'll begin to embody that ethos without knowing it.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bitcoin News Channel. I'm your host, Rob Wallace, and today I'm very grateful to be joined by Frank Corva, one of the most respected journalists in all of Bitcoin. He's the former White House correspondent for Bitcoin Magazine, and now the host of the podcast, New Renaissance Capital. Frank, how you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you for having me, Rob.
Absolutely. So you've been in the Bitcoin's journalism space for about 3 years now, 4 years, and you've seen many different things come and go. And 2025 was quite the year, correct? We had, of course, Bitcoin treasury companies. Trump, the quote-unquote Bitcoin president, came into power. Lots of euphoria. Looking back on it, was definitely sort of a euphoria, manic type of feel going on in 2025. But now that sentiment has kind of changed. But I would love to ask you, there's still plenty of reasons to be excited about Bitcoin and what is going on. So please tell us, what to you is the most exciting thing going on in Bitcoin right now?
Yeah, I think the same thing that was going on during the bear markets. What I focus most on is grassroots adoption around the world. Even when I was doing the work at the White House, or if you saw me covering the Samourai and Tornado Cash trials, behind the scenes, I was always in touch with people around the world, across Africa, Latin America, parts of Southeast Asia, where people were adopting Bitcoin despite whatever the price was. And sometimes these people are living in jurisdictions where they're cut off from decent money, traditional financial services, whatever it may be. They're just using Bitcoin day in, day out. It's not to say that they don't pay any attention to the price fluctuations or they're not happy when the price of Bitcoin goes up, but they're not going to stop using it because the price is down. So the most signal to me exists in the places where people are using Bitcoin come hell or high water, where it's just their money of choice at this point. And that doesn't change whether we're in a bear market or a bull market.
What are some of the Bitcoin circular economies around the world that get you the most excited?
Yeah, I just published a piece on a project called Afribit Kibera. So Kibera is a informal settlement within the city limits of Nairobi. Informal settlement, another word for that is slum. I don't really like using that word because I don't really like calling anybody's neighborhood a slum. I don't feel like I have that right, especially on another continent where I'm not even from. But I have been to Kibera. I went there to visit it myself after I went to the African Bitcoin conference in 2024. I've lived in places like that before. I lived in a barrio, which is like a poor neighborhood in Venezuela under the Chavez regime. So I've seen, poverty close up. I've worked in pretty rough neighborhoods here in New York, doing work with very vulnerable populations. And Kibera is intense. I'll just leave it at that. It's quite, it's living on $1 a day sort of situation, homes that don't have bathing facilities or bathrooms or things like that. It's very, very intense. And then one of the things that, we take for granted here is just simply things like garbage collection. So one of the things in Kibera you'll see is just a lot of garbage everywhere. And so what this project has done to start is they've actually started a garbage cleanup program and an upcycling program that pays the participants in sats. That's where they started, but they're doing far more work around digital literacy, financial literacy, using Bitcoin as a catalyst for personal change in this neighborhood. So that's Afribit Kibera. There's a project called Bitcoin Dua on the border of, and again, if I didn't mention it, I said Nairobi. I'm not sure specific. That's in Kenya for those who might not be aware of where Nairobi is. So in Kenya, there's another project called Bitcoin Dua in Ghana that I actually went to visit as well after the 2023 African Bitcoin conference. That's on the border of Togo and Ghana, about a half hour west of that border. And this guy, Kofi, has been doing such great work there that even the likes of Jack Dorsey and the Block team have noticed it, and they've just contributed half a Bitcoin to building a facility there, like a sports facility for the community. And what's really great about that, part of that story that's so great, is that Kofi, who started the circular economy, has been a community organizer or a figure in the community for a very long time. So he's very trusted, and a lot of the work that he does isn't just, hey, Bitcoin's the best money, use it, accept it at your store, you spend it. It's very much tied to community engagement, bettering the lives of people in the community, and he's a respected figure in that community. So it ends up having this exponential impact. It's Bitcoin plus this idea of getting people more involved and making people feel maybe more of a responsibility for their community, more empowered. So really, really positive stuff. Obviously, I love Bitcoin Beach. I've been there as well. That's the first one. I've been to Bitcoin Akazi in South Africa. Love that one as well. And I'm spacing out. I've been to one or two other. Bitcoin Whitsand also in South Africa is very cool. There's many of these now that are springing up all over the world, so I don't want to keep rambling some off to then leave some out. But yeah, some of the stuff that I've seen, again, this idea of not just like Bitcoin's the best money, so now people are saving in places where they've never saved. It's far bigger than that. It's a catalyst for change. It's making people think about the future more. It's making people more hopeful. And I recommend to anybody, if you get a chance to go to one of these, even start with Bitcoin Beach in El Salvador. It's only about an hour or so from San Salvador, the capital, if you fly in. It's a truly remarkable thing to see firsthand. So shout out to all those communities.
And so how does a Bitcoin circular economy really get started? I mean, Bitcoin Beach in El Salvador had the grant, of course, and so they had a community to some funding behind them. But in Kibera, how does it start? Do you need just one person to go out there and evangelize, or is there multiple people? What's your findings there?
Fantastic question. Really important question. How it starts and then how it maintains itself. These are two really important questions to ask. Usually it starts with some level of charitable giving, whether that's the anonymous donor in Bitcoin Beach, something like that. But then what you try to get to is this isn't a circular economy, but I'll give an example of this. There's a program called Bitcoin Data, which is a program for African women to learn about Bitcoin. And one of Lorraine Marcel's main goals with that is not just to teach these women about Bitcoin, but to get them jobs within the Bitcoin space. And I think some of it is that you want these people finding employment, just using Bitcoin as everyday money. It becomes a bit more self-sustainable there. I can't share what this is yet. I was with Obi Nwasu from Fedi last night, and we were talking a little bit about what he's planning to do to help some of these circular economies earn money, save money, use Bitcoin in a more sustainable fashion. And so I would just say keep your eyes on what Fedi is doing, because I think you're going to see some really cool stuff there sooner than later. The problem right now is that oftentimes with these circular economies, a lot of them are still dependent on grants and continued grants, because there are people working kind of for Bitcoin, if you will, in these circular economies. Like Bitcoin Akazi, I think it's well over a dozen people who are employed by it. So that the reliance there is grants again. They've gotten grants from Jack Dorsey to build their sports complex, to pay people. Some of the money from Bitcoin Beach came from that. The thing that they're looking to do, one of the things they did in Bitcoin Akazi is they said, okay, here's the side of all these shacks where people live. Let's charge people money to put an Aqua Wallet ad or a Fedi ad or a Tondo ad. And so they're trying to think creatively about this. They're also building a community center in Bitcoin Akazi, and they're looking into who's gonna what are the sponsors. But it's not hey, give to us charitably because we're doing good work. It's literally we'll give you this, this, and this. We will advertise for your company. We'll tell people. We'll sort of maybe it's a wallet or something like that, Bull Bitcoin or whatever. They will help people use the wallet or whatever it is, and it's not they're gonna it's not gonna be some, part of my language, but shitcoin wallet, Trust Wallet or something. They're gonna do their homework on the people that they bring in. But I think the idea is sort of a symbiosis with people developing things in the space that people can use in these communities. So I think that's part of it. But then the other side of it is that once these communities start kind of going, it's just people spending the Bitcoin they've earned. It stays in the community. And there's a lot of emphasis on that as well. Buy local, keep this money here, let this money sort of be the rising tide that lifts these communities. The communities kind of as a whole, or at least everybody who's participating in the Bitcoin economy in these communities, helping that rise up. One thing I'll say too with Bitcoin Akazi in particular, I wrote a piece for Forbes on this about a year and a half ago or so, and it was what's cool there is they're involving the local public school. Kids get Bitcoin education in the school, and it's all voluntary. It's not it's now part of the national curriculum or anything. but they're really trying to say like, hey, this is a very serious thing we're doing. It's very much helping people in the community. They've tied it also to this Surfer Kids nonprofit. And so there's this idea of like, it just has to be ingrained in everything you're doing. Public education, this nonprofit work, spending at the local community store. And I think inevitably it just becomes the money that people use. But right now, I think we're still in the process of these communities do need some sort of Kickstarter. Sometimes that's Geyser Fund or other funds like the Bitcoin Beach Fund. And now I think there's an Africa Fund as well. So that's still a thing. But I think over time, there's a bunch of other things that'll happen. Like I said, keep an eye on what Fetty's doing. But over time, I think people are coming up with more and more ways to make these things sustainable. I don't think there's a perfect blueprint yet, but little by little, we're sort of iterating, and each of the communities is learning from the other ones. So I think that will sort of unfold in time. But right now, it is an issue. We need to figure out sustainable. The communities that are doing this need to figure out sustainability and not necessarily rely solely on charitable giving.
And the beautiful thing about these circular economies, they're using Bitcoin as everyday money, right? They're going out and spending it, buying things, receiving it as payment for doing services. And they're also developing some apps as well to help them use it as everyday money, right? There's Tondo and there's Honey Badger, I believe, in South Africa. So what is it like when you go to these places, actually going out and spending the money there? What do you see as Bitcoin being used as a transactional currency?
It's a great question. So like I'll use Bitcoin Akazi as an example since I was just talking about it. I visited Bitcoin Akazi, I think it was last January after the Adopting Bitcoin conference in South Africa. There I just spent Bitcoin from whatever wallet, I just bought. If I went to the store in Bitcoin Akazi while I was there, I just spent Bitcoin. That was great. I had a very, very cool experience in Kenya, and I actually wrote a little bit about this because this is a trend I'm noticing globally. And what's being created now are what I call Lightning-to-fiat interface, Lightning-to-fiat interface apps. So in Kenya, there's a mobile money system called M-Pesa. I cannot use M-Pesa while I'm there because I don't have anyone who doesn't have a national ID, like if you're a refugee in Kenya or you don't have a digital ID, you cannot use their mobile money system, which means the system that most people are using to pay for an Uber or to even just accept a payment if you're selling fruit on the side of the road or something like that. That system, you can't use it. You have to use cash, which is, if you're not living in a very safe neighborhood, unsafe to hold anything in serious quantity. So what Tondo allows you to do, it's an app that was built by a Kenyan woman and her partner. You can spend from your Lightning wallet. They created an interface that allows that payment to settle on the M-Pesa network. So I paid for restaurant bills with Bitcoin while I was in Kenya, but the restaurant was none the wiser. They didn't have to be onboarded to Bitcoin for me to be able to spend that Bitcoin because it was settling over Tondo. And when I say how seamless it is, it's insanely seamless. There's no KYC. You download an app. There's 4 buttons. One of them is like connect your Bitcoin wallet. The other one is make a payment. And it's very, very quick. So we're also seeing this in Costa Rica. Bull Bitcoin, shout out to I forget the name of the app, but Bull Bitcoin has created a similar interface there. There's another one in Ghana called BitSpenda, where same sort of thing. That's a web app interface. So really, really cool stuff. What's great about this is most people would say, well, what's so good about that? These places are still accepting fiat. That's fine. But Bitcoin is a voluntary thing. These restaurants or whatever places you're interfacing with or going to, they might not be along. They might not fully get what Bitcoin is yet. And there's a number of reasons why they might not have adopted it. But it allows the person who wants to live on a Bitcoin standard, who wants to spend their Bitcoin, to do so without thinking twice or without having to go through the KYC process at an exchange to go exchange their Bitcoin for Kenyan shillings or dollars or Costa Rican dollars or pesos. I'm not sure what the currency is there. And so I think it's really exciting to see that it at least enables one side of the party in this transaction to spend the currency that they want to spend. It's a really great way, to enable people to not have to think too much about, what am I going to do with this Bitcoin now that I have it? And Sabina from Tondo, that was one of the questions she wanted to answer. She was working for Machankura. For those unaware, Machankura is a super cool technology that allows people to send Bitcoin over the SMS system in South Africa and a few other African countries. I think there it's called the USSD system, but same idea, over text. You could send Bitcoin over text using like an old kind of Nokia phone. So even if you don't have a smartphone, you can interface with Bitcoin. It's a custodial system, but it's a super, super cool invention. She was working for Machankura, sort of, they call them orange pillars, like onboarding people to Bitcoin. So she would onboard, she would say to like a waitress, let's say, at a restaurant, hey, could I tip you in Bitcoin? Then the waiter or waitress would be like, well, what am I going to do with this Bitcoin after? And that question stuck with her. And she said, okay, well, that's a great question. What are we going to do with this Bitcoin after? And that's why she invented Tondo. So really cool thing, seeing people come up with solutions, local solutions. Honestly, it fills my heart up. And it's not even about Bitcoin, to be honest. It just gives me hope that human beings can come up with really creative ways to solve their problems. And I think a lot of this story is almost like when you're building with freedom tech like Bitcoin, it's just like it enables so much that we have not been able to do in human history, and it's happening all over the world. And I wish more people were reporting on it. I appreciate you giving me a little space to talk about this, but it's a really, really cool development. And again, if you do travel, I highly suggest using these apps and checking this stuff out for yourself. To quote Andreas Antonopoulos, he said, Bitcoin is much better experienced than it is explained. And I think we all learned that when we used a hardware wallet or, that kind of stuff. But when you use some of this real world interface stuff, it's truly like, okay, we're moving into the future and we're bringing Bitcoin with us.
Yeah, and I remember when I started with Bitcoin News reporting on these things back in 2023, right? And there was lots of great stories happening around the world, and we were in a bear market then, and so it sort of that was the shining light at the top of the hill for us to go follow and report on. And since then, many other things have come up in the Bitcoin ecosystem, but regularly sharing these maps of the growing Bitcoin ecosystem in Africa, in Indonesia. You see the pop-up, the meetups popping up all over, the different companies. And so do you feel that acceleration, you having your thumb on the pulse of the growing Bitcoin world in, say, Latin America or Africa, Indonesia? Do you feel like it's still growing in that same speed?
I would say exponentially. It's truly growing at this amazing rate that, again, most of the world isn't paying attention. Part of the reason I pivoted back to covering it is I used to have this feeling I'd be at the White House and I'd be paying attention to Donald Trump, and this isn't like a critique of him or anything, but this is like the most paid attention to man in the world. Like, this is the most covered man. I'm like, this person does not need my attention. Like, I understand this thing fundamentally. I see this thing that a lot of people, even in the Bitcoin space, don't see. Like, I need to get back to highlighting that because there's such beautiful things happening, because the catalyst that Bitcoin has been for you, that it has been for me, when you watch that happen for other people, and it's happening, I think, more and more seamlessly. That's the beautiful part of it. It's like, it was, when you and I probably got into Bitcoin, I'm not sure when you got into it, but for me, it was like back in January 2018 after the bull market. It was hard. I mean, I think I literally back then had to wire money to Coinbase. That's how, it was that unseamless at that point. It was very, very difficult. Even interfaces with hardware wallets and all that kind of stuff, it was harder. Lightning really wasn't a thing yet. So it's really amazing to see the tech now sort of, I think, getting to a point where it's getting closer to competing with legacy payment tech. So forget about wallets within the Bitcoin space competing against each other. We're talking about this being as easy to use as PayPal or Venmo or M-Pesa or whatever other sort of payment system you use with the traditional system. So I think it's really exciting to see. I think the other side that comes with that, and again, I'll give a shout out to not only the Fedi team, but the Machancora team, the work that Tondo does, the work that Bull Bitcoin and the team are doing in Costa Rica, the work that everyone's doing in circular economies. There's a legitimate education that's coming with it. And so they're teaching people responsibility. You don't just get onboarded via a wallet like Blink, which is a custodial wallet, a fantastic custodial wallet, and then say, okay, good luck. And then maybe one day, God forbid, Blink goes under, and now that those sats disappear. There are people saying, look, Blink is something you might use for day-to-day transactions. We keep a little bit of money in there. Fees are low when you use Blink. All good stuff. But here's how to use a self-custodial wallet. Here's how to do this stuff. And what you're learning, and this is one of the things, so I was training to be a social worker before I left that and moved into this space full time. There's so much, I forget what the word is now, paternalism in that space. Like, oh, these people, they can't do this. Like, we can't trust them. It's like, no, they can. Like, I've traveled around the world and I've watched literally some of the poorest communities on the planet learn how to do this thing, and I've watched it empower them. And I think it even has sort of made me rethink politics. I used to be probably, I would say, a little bit more left of center. And I don't even, not that I'm like right of center now, but I'm just sort of like politically homeless or whatever. But it's there's this thing where I'm like, I don't believe anyone who says that anyone can't do something anymore. It's whether or not that person chooses to take responsibility. And what you're seeing, and to also answer your question, is that exponentially more people are choosing to take responsibility, and that will change the world in ways that we cannot foresee yet, but I think in ways that will ultimately be extremely good.
I wanted to briefly interrupt today's interview to give a big shout out to our lead sponsor, Rhino Bitcoin. Rhino is the all-in-one Bitcoin super app built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. Buy or sell instantly. Send sats anywhere on the Lightning Network. Withdraw straight to cold storage. Even turn sats into gift cards or link to a Costa multisig, all within one sleek interface. And Rhino is just warming up. Soon, you'll pay bills, borrow against your Bitcoin, and save for retirement, all without leaving the app. Download Rhino at rhinobitcoin.com or tap the link in the description below. Use promo code Bitcoin News and Rhino will drop you $10 of free Bitcoin into your account today. Secure your stack with Rhino Bitcoin and enjoy the rest of the video. And so that's your focus right now. You've got the new podcast, New Renaissance Capital, and you're interviewing people from all over the world focusing on growing Bitcoin adoption. But before that, you were deep in the weeds when it came to politics and the legal system with Bitcoin. And you were there in the courtroom for the Tornado Cash case as well as the Samourai Dev case. So Take us back to those days. What was it like going into the courtroom on a daily basis, watching those proceedings? And how do you think it's all wound up now that they've had their sentences?
Great question. Really important question, too. So this goes back as far. I was at the first pre-trial hearing for the Samourai case, and it was me and my buddy Jeremy, who used to work at Bitcoin Magazine with me, and nobody else. There was no other media there at that point. And so it was very weird. I didn't expect it, but I very quickly became known as the guy covering that case. I would go to conferences here in the States or abroad, and people would stop me and be like, "Thank you for your coverage of the Samourai." I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." I had no idea. Like, that's great. I'm glad you found it helpful. For me, I just felt, more than anything, I just felt like someone from the Bitcoin community needed to be there. Like, my journalistic hat was almost like secondary. Like, I had to learn so much stuff about the legal system, the Southern District of New York in general. Did I like doing that? No. It's like, it's terrible. It's not my forte. It's not like the thing that really excites me. But, most of the time I was there, I was thinking like, well, if I was developing this tech that is helping people to preserve privacy, I would want someone from the Bitcoin space, a journalist that, cares, to be here as well. And I had conversations with Keon outside the courtroom and outside, the courthouse about this sort of stuff. And he would always sort of thank me. And I was happy, it's just like, you don't have to thank me for anything. Like, we should be, at the very least, covering this. And I've also at the same time been vocal. I work with a lot of people for whom privacy is really key. The activists that you might hear about through like HRF, the Human Rights Foundation, and stuff like that. And I didn't love everything Samourai said about like Russian oligarchs come and use our thing and blah, blah, blah. Like, that stuff kind of bothered me. And I was like, it is what it is. I get it. They were sort of like, it's kind of almost like part of the marketing. It's said facetiously or whatever, but it sort of made things a little bit more difficult, especially in the courtroom, because I was there also for when they took the plea deal and when they pled guilty, and the judge took all those things very, very seriously. So it was very hard to see that, because I'm sure that on a certain level they regretted it. I don't think they regretted creating the tech, and I respect them for that. But I think that looking back, they might have sort of used different rhetoric around it. And I still try to highlight the fact that I just spoke with this guy Zia Saad, who's the leading Bitcoin educator in Iran, and the Samourai devs were so cool that they actually created a smaller pool for Iranian people because they didn't have enough money to get into the bigger pools that existed with Samourai. And I'm like, man, why wasn't that your messaging? Like, we're here to help people who really need this. Like, that's such good messaging. Like, who's gonna be against that? So I really respect them for that. To answer your question, though, I apologize. I think it's the New Yorker in me. I tend to just go off on these tangents. To answer your question, it was very intense being there for all of it. I knew on a certain level history was being made. I think we can equate some of this stuff to the PGP wars of the 90s, so the pretty good privacy wars, the court cases that allowed for encryption to exist. The government was trying to say encryption is a munition, that we shouldn't put it in the hands of everyday people or allow it to exist. And thanks to the work that people did back then, Cypherpunks, and I'm spacing out on the names involved, I apologize, but the work they did, I felt like we need to be there for this. Like, somebody just needs to be there. And even with like Tornado Cash, I know I don't really cover Ethereum or like Ethereum for that matter, but I believe in P2P rights, and I believe in the right to transact with whatever network you want to use. And Roman Storm, I don't think, should be on trial for what he did. So what was it like being there for all that? It was especially the Tornado Cash case. So for those who are unaware, like Samourai never went to trial, so it wasn't like I had to sit there day in, day out for that. I went to all the pretrial hearings. I went to when they pled guilty. I went to the sentencing hearings and otherwise covered it as much as I could. Tornado Cash did go to trial, and I spent about a month of this summer in the Southern District of New York every day covering this case. And it's intense because you can't bring your phone or computer in. So you're taking handwritten notes for like 6 hours, 7 hours a day, coming out, trying to do a video to let people know what happened. A lot of people sort of anxious about it. So you're trying to sort of feed them some information right away, going home, processing that information, putting that out, and at the same time trying to do like communications with the White House. I had my pass to the White House at that point, so it was long days. It was really, really long. I think the biggest part about it, I think the best part about it was, some of those days, especially towards the end before the verdict was read aloud, while the jury was deliberating. Spending some time with Roman Storm, talking with him. He's a good dude. He doesn't deserve to be going through this. And I think especially with him, there was plenty of evidence that showed that Tornado Cash really made a massive effort. They worked with the authorities. They blacklisted certain addresses. They did the things that they were asked to do. So I think that some of that nuance is important to note as well. These Samourai and Tornado Cash were not the same thing in many regards, though at the same time, it was criminalizing privacy for people who did not touch the private keys to user funds, that did not control user funds at any point in time. And I don't think either case should have ever been brought to trial for that reason. I still believe that the government was trying to make an example of them. So when the Blanche Memo, for those who don't know, the Blanche Memo was published in April of last year. I think it was April 1st. It was a memo from Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche stating we're not going after the technology or the people who create the technology, including crypto mixers anymore. We'll go after the people who use this technology for illicit means or to do bad stuff or whatever. I emailed the Department of Justice. This was with, my White House credentials at that point, almost every day for like 2 months through April and May, just being like, hey, if that's how you feel, you just published a memo about this, why won't you come out and say something? Why won't you come out and, say this, we're not taking this thing to court? And it just felt like this weird, like it was almost performative that they put out the Blanche Memo, that he published it, that they didn't really mean it. And I think the big question remains with all this. The best way I've heard this sort of argument phrased is by Peter von Valkenburg at Coin Center, who's done amazing work with P2P rights and fighting for it since 2014. He said, like, under Trump, we are well on the way to becoming the crypto capital of the world as far as the securitized version of crypto is concerned. ETFs or blah, 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 like this sort of financialized KYC version of crypto. And I say crypto here not because I'm a broader crypto guy or whatever, just that's the term he used. And, again, in terms of P2P rights, we should be all aligned in this regard, no matter what network or blockchain you're using. And he said, we're well on our way to becoming the securitized, KYC version of crypto, all that stuff. Are we on the way to becoming the P2P rights crypto capital of the world? That remains to be seen. I hope that we are, though. And I think that's the big question right now, is that there's been a lot of posturing and there's been some very legitimate action by the administration as well. But with these developers in jail and with Roman Storm still waiting to see what's going to happen with the appeal, to have the case brought to the appellate level, it's difficult for me to. It's hard to say this because everything, the closer you get to politics, the more you learn everything is sort of politics and it's all kind of a trade-off. So I think with Samourai, the best bet, without even critiquing Trump for being like a political animal, he's the president of the United States, he has to be a political animal. There's going to need to be like a trade-off. He's going to need to think that the Bitcoin community is not going to vote for him in midterms for him to pardon the Samourai devs. That's my take. I don't know if that's right. Nobody has ever told me that. But there's going to need to be some incentive for him to want to do so, because I don't think that a low-level case like that, for example, I think when there was a guy named Sander Lutz from Decrypt who asked Trump in December at the White House, he said, are you thinking about pardoning the Samourai devs? And Trump, that was when Trump was like, hey, do you think I should pardon them or whatever? And I was like, man, what an awkward situation to be in. I was like half happy that it wasn't me. I would have said yes for the record, but I was like, man, that's like as a journalist, you're not supposed to be answering those questions from the president of the United States. So, but to the point, I think Gavin Newsom the day after that posted something like, these are the sorts of people that Trump wants to pardon or whatever. Like there's going to be a political blowback for it. So he needs a political reason to say that these guys are getting pardoned. It's not the same thing as Ross Ulbricht. That was a huge part of like trying to win over the libertarian base while he was running. Hey, I'll pardon Ross Ulbricht. And Ross Ulbricht, it was just a different situation. This is not the same thing. While the Overton window on privacy is beginning to shift, it has not shifted very far, and I wouldn't say there are many privacy advocates in government. At the lower levels of government, yes, I've spoken with some people at the state level that really care about it. Some Bitcoiners like, what's his name? Totally spacing out. Really good guy. The guy who actually drafted the bill for the SBR in New Hampshire. Totally spacing out, but Keith Almond, Representative Keith Almond, great guy, cares about privacy, really good guy. I've gotten to know him well, really like an old school Bitcoiner, good dude. But yeah, it's a matter of political capital at this point. And I think it's sad to know that because you have 2 developers in jail that shouldn't be there and what's happening with Roman Storm. It's sad to know that it is about political capital, but I think that's the reality. So I think if we want to get them out, we're going to have to think strategically. If that means Bitcoiners saying, I don't know, making a big deal about it and saying we're not voting Trump in midterms, might be a way to go. I don't know. I'm not floating that idea for the record. I'm just saying that, but I think there's going to need to be some form of leverage, I think, in this process. And I don't know what that'll end up looking like.
And what is your take on the Bitcoin community's response during all this? We were able to raise 15,000 signatures on a petition.
Yep.
But beyond that, do you think that was enough? Or do you think that enough attention was put on this very important issue?
I think those 15,000 signatures are basically the water level. That's like the amount of people who care about this. That's the best way I can put it. I don't know how many people, I mean, if you ask the average everyday person, if you still ask them what is Bitcoin, they're going to tell you it's a scam. So forget about like what is Samourai Wallet and what does privacy mean? Like that's just not a thing. I think that Econo-Alchemist and the people who put the petition together and who did it, it's great. I think we got the majority of the people that are going to sign it. Maybe I'm wrong, and I hope that changes, but I think it'll be a drastic sort of privacy breach and more people understanding what Bitcoin is that gets more people to understand the importance of what Samourai Wallet was doing. But I think the Bitcoin community made a pretty good effort about it. And I think the fact that, Lola's doing a great job publishing Kion's letters from prison and Bitcoin Magazine is syndicating them. I think Marty's TFTC is syndicating them. I think that's the best we could do. And I think any one of us in the Bitcoin space, like I'll be honest, I've moved on from the thing at the White House. The only thing I will get in touch with them about at this point is to feed them information about the Samourai case. That's it. Like, because I want them to be like, look, this is an issue to a lot of Bitcoiners. It's a non-negligible amount of people, because even if there's only 15,000 who really care, if each of those is influencing a handful of people as well, now you're talking about a bigger swath of the population. And then, maybe that does affect the electoral math come midterms. And again, it's like we've seen how quickly sentiment can shift. I mean, I don't think Samourai Wallet is equivalent to like the Epstein stuff, but a lot of people are now upset with Trump and the administration and everything else because they're withholding this stuff. So I think he understands that sentiment can shift. I've been very blunt in how I've pitched it to them. And honestly, like no shade, Carolyn Levitt's team and everybody there has always been super, super nice to me. They've been great. But I sort of for better or worse, I sort of see how politics works. And I pitched it to them saying like, look, there's a non-negligible amount of voters out there that really care about this thing. And it would make a big difference to them. More than that, I just think we need to see a precedent set where these developers get freed. And then ideally, I haven't looked at the recent language, or I'm not sure where market structure is at. I've been a little too busy with other things. But ideally, whatever market structure ends up looking like, the Clarity Act that is, there's protections, and we don't even see these sorts of things go to trial because we don't want to be here begging for pardons every time some other developer has these charges thrown at them. It's going to have a chilling effect. It's going to hurt efforts toward privacy. Privacy needs to be normalized. And I think that the people who have raised their voices thus far about Keon and Bill and Roman Storm need to just continue doing that. And I want to say to convince friends and family that it's also important, but I'm a big believer that pain ends up being the teacher, not necessarily just like intellectual curiosity or like, oh, privacy, that sounds like it's important. Unfortunately, I think it's going to be data breaches and other ways in which people's privacy rights are violated that are going to make them realize why this is important. So I think right now we're fighting a little bit of an uphill battle with this, but it's still important to talk about because I think it's important to normalize privacy and to contextualize it correctly. Like I often say to people, they're like, well, you know, the sort of average normie argument is sort of like, well, what do you need privacy for if you're not doing anything illegal? It's like, okay, I said this frequently. Why do you close your shades? Why do you close the door when you use the bathroom? You know what I mean? Like everyone, you don't even realize how much privacy you take for granted on a day-to-day basis. And living in a digital age, you also don't realize how much of yourself is exposed and the risks that come with that. So we're moving into an era where I think human psychology needs to shift en masse. So this is beyond a Bitcoin thing. We just haven't fully gone through that shift. I think Bitcoin and financial transactions online will be part of the catalyst. It'll be part of the thing that catalyzes that shift. But again, this is still like, we're just still very, very early to this. And I don't say that to be like, we're the enlightened ones and we're super early. It's just like, especially in the West, a lot of the systems work well enough. The average person sending a Venmo payment doesn't care that it's not private or a PayPal payment or whatever. So there's almost too much comfort for people to really understand the importance of this stuff. For the time being, though, to answer your question, yes, I think we've done a pretty good job in raising attention about this.
And a man whose name you brought up just now was Epstein. And Bitcoin has been associated with him due to its mention in his emails that were just released, 3 million plus emails to the public. And it did turn out that he funded the MIT lab that gave some funding to the early Bitcoin developers. And now there seems to be this label that people outside of the Bitcoin community, I think especially other coins, are trying to label Bitcoin as associated with Epstein. What's your take on this? And where do we go from here? How do we get this stink off of Bitcoin?
I don't know. And I think the whole... So I actually heard the other day, my old boss Brandon from BTC Inc. posted something about apparently Ripple is funding a bot army of like calling Bitcoin pedo coin. I'm not sure. I haven't fact checked that yet, but it wouldn't surprise me. I'll just leave it at that. Given some of the other attacks Ripple has made on Bitcoin. I don't know, and I know that there's a lot of division over BIP 110 and Bitcoin Core and Bitcoin Knots, and I'm surely not going to comment on that because I don't need to be attacked. And I actually am a complete advocate of everybody running whatever software they want and advocating for whatever they want. I just ask that you do it in good faith. The Epstein, pedo coin, Bitcoin, Jeffrey Epstein had his hands in everything. If he didn't have his hands in Bitcoin, it would make me think it wasn't important. The beautiful part about Bitcoin, and I'll quote Shinobi, my old coworker at Bitcoin Magazine, he's just like, look, it all happens in the open. So whether Epstein was involved or not, the code is the code. Like, was he trying to influence it? Maybe. We don't know, but the code is still the code, and we can all see what happens with that, and we're all looking. So it doesn't surprise me. I also subscribe to the idea of like Mark Goodwin, author of the Bitcoin Dollar, my old editor at Bitcoin Magazine, writes a lot about Tether and I don't know, was Bitcoin sort of ultimately, is it sort of a foundation to help prop up dollar hegemony? Is it the way for the United States to pay off the debt? Or are we going to end up running Tether over Bitcoin rails? Like, maybe. And there's probably some credibility to all that. Is that what Epstein would have wanted? Yeah, sure, definitely. This all comes down to the choices we make, though. I think Mark made a really good point at the end of his last appearance on what Bitcoin did. He's like, look, it's up to us to define what Bitcoin culture is. Jeffrey Epstein didn't create Bitcoin. Even if the U.S. government created Bitcoin, it's still open source software that can be forked, that can be, we can build on it what we want to build on it. So I think anyone sort of arguing Bitcoin is pedo coin or Jeffrey Epstein coin or blah, 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 you just can't do that. Like he had his hands in so many. I mean, you can. Don't get me wrong. Do whatever you want to do. But it's he had his hands in so many things. It just seems like, again, I would almost have been concerned if he wasn't interested in Bitcoin on any level. But the other stuff that I think gets, people don't talk about it as much, as he was talking with the likes. I think it was him that was talking with the likes of like Steve Bannon and other people about other cryptos, Zcash, and other stuff. So if Bitcoin was really his focus, I don't think he would have been looking at other crypto networks. Maybe stable coins, Tether, whatever. But I didn't read through all the files. I don't even know that he was commenting on Tether. But I think that if Bitcoin, if it was really about, if Bitcoin was a product of Jeffrey Epstein or the Jeffrey Epstein class or whatever, I don't think there would have been focus on anything but Bitcoin. I think it was more just another thing that was in his view. He was interested in it like everything else. He was probably interested in controlling it to whatever capacity he could. Does he control it? Did he control it? In my humble opinion, no. I'm not a developer, and I can't read all the code, but I don't think that that's the case. And again, everything with Bitcoin happens in the open. So if you're piling on and saying, well, why did MIT accept this money or that money? It's not. Honestly, with this kind of stuff, it's not that simple. Maybe it is. Maybe MIT did know he was a bad guy. They took the money anyway. I don't know. I would just say that these things tend to be a little bit more complicated than they're presented to be, and I'm not giving MIT a pass. I don't know what all the dealings were. I don't know what was said to these people, but I know someone like Jeremy Rubin, who Epstein was in touch with. I've had long conversations with him. I just, in my gut, this is someone who was a teacher for 12. I'm a teacher for 12 years, and I was training to be a social worker. I just don't get evil vibes. I'm sure Jeremy now is kind of cringes, like, why was I communicating with this guy? But I just don't feel like he was bought by Epstein. And funding for developers and these programs came from lots of different people. A lot of them on maybe varying levels, also kind of immoral. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein is sort of like the definition of immorality, but there's other people who have their hands in these things that are also doing not such great stuff as well. And it is what it is. Like, it's open source code. Anybody can audit it. And at the end of the day, that's the thing that really matters.
And that's a very nuanced answer that is hard to express in 280 characters in a tweet and get the detractors to understand. But we must persist and explain to people, yes, Bitcoin is open source. You can see it all right there, and there is no backdoor. And if there was, of course, we could change it if we needed to as a community. But Jeffrey Epstein was a New Yorker, and so are you. Yeah. And I'm not putting you in the same bucket as Jeffrey Epstein now. But I am saying that you live in a city that is actually pretty anti-Bitcoin. You could call New York State the most anti-Bitcoin place in America.
Yep.
But there are some green shoots. There's PubKey, right? There's conferences. Where do you see Bitcoin in New York going forward?
It's a great question. I was a little bit hopeful for a hot minute there. We had someone who was running for the Republican nomination for Attorney General. His name was Karam Dara. I had gotten in touch with him, and I'd gone to some of his one of his fundraisers, and I did a fireside chat with him at PubKey. Shout out to PubKey. New York is a really, really weird thing. There's a lot of gatekeepers here, and that's Wall Street on one side of things, and then the NYDFS, the New York Department of Financial Services, the SDNY, Southern District of New York, where the Samourai and Tornado Cash trials cases were being tried or what have you. I'm hopeful. I'm always hopeful. I try to be optimistic. New York is a state where there are a lot of entrenched interests, and people like to sort of establish and keep their control. And one of the things we've done in New York, or I'll say I live here, I wasn't part of it, but in 2015, for those who don't know, there was something called the BIT license that was created. That's regulation. It's a license you need to be a virtual asset service provider, a VASP, in New York. That license is extremely difficult to get. Like, takes years, millions of dollars in paying for fees that help you to get over hurdles and to get through red tape. And then even that, you sort of just get dragged along, even at the last minute. So Strike is on the verge of getting their BIT license. Jack has talked about this on his show. And even that, I was with Thomas from PubKey last night. I was at an event at PubKey last night. And Thomas is like, I think he was talking about, I think there's going to be, Jack said as much, there's going to be a celebration when they do at PubKey. And even that, Jack has been like, and Thomas like, any day now. Like, we hope it comes through. And what's crazier is I spoke with a New York Assemblyman, Clyde Vanell. I covered the Democratic National Convention, and there was this side crypto event that I went to, and this guy, a New York Assemblyman was there, and we were talking. And I did an interview with him for a piece I was writing for Bitcoin Magazine. And at the end of it, I said facetiously, I'm like, oh, my friend, like, when do we get rid of the bit license? Just thinking he would roll his eyes as well, as this is someone who owns some Bitcoin, some crypto assets. And he was like, why would we want to get rid of the bit license? I'm like, dude, what? Like, what are you talking? And he was genuinely like, no, we're protecting people. Like, we're the good guys. We're the ones. And I'll give him credit for this. He's like, we protected you from BlockFi. We protected you from FTX. And okay, that's fine. I will give you that, no question. Are you also protecting me from Strike? Have you protected me from Swan forever? Are you protecting me from Kraken? Are you protecting me from like all these other, reputable institutions? Are you protecting me from the Lightning Network? In New York, we are the only state where you cannot transfer your money out of Cash App to a wallet over Lightning. Where you're not allowed to use Lightning in this regard. So it's just this thing where I'm like, I'll give you credit where it's due, sure, but like you honestly can't believe that just creating massive amounts of hurdles for people is for these companies to exist in the place that is supposed to be home to the city that is the center of the market economy, the home to capitalism, New York City. And we're not allowing the apps that allow for the best form of money to flourish here. Like, I'm sorry, you're not going to win me over with this argument. But this is similar to dynamics that exist in places like New York, Chicago, places where there's these entrenched financial interests, political interests. It's really difficult to get things to move. The gatekeepers, the keepers of the old financial guard, Wall Street, they like things the way that they are. Anybody can invest in any Bitcoin ETF here. Wall Street is happy to have sort of their paws all over that. But yeah, to use Bitcoin over Lightning, to use some of these services, these platforms, much harder here. Will that change? I don't know. Long term, I'm optimistic. Yes, I do think we move into a world where Bitcoin is the money of choice, and basically all this sort of regulatory stuff fades away. Will it change tomorrow? I don't know. Corromdara, unfortunately, did not get the nomination from the Republican Party to run for. He was running he was running for New York Attorney General, and he did not get that nomination. So I don't know who did, but I don't think that they're particularly a pro-Bitcoin person. Corromdara was. He actually worked for Coinbase for a little bit. He worked in financial markets as well. I think he would have made a push to try to influence the governor of New York, who is the person that has to sort of be on board with getting rid of the bit license and making New York a more friendly jurisdiction to Bitcoin. But it probably will not change in the near future. And I do think deep down New York will pay for that. I still think that there are plenty. We saw like an exodus to Miami, Nashville, Austin, to these other cities. And some people came back to New York, it's true, but a lot didn't. And I think that will continue to happen. Plus, sort of the affordability crisis here. I think people will look for, especially if you're into Bitcoin, greener pastures elsewhere. So it will be to New York's detriment. Ideally, they wake up to this in the next, hopefully, 5 years. Hopefully sooner than that, though.
So another common thread between us, not just the East Coast thing, but we also grew up big fans of punk music, and you started your career in the music industry, specifically in hardcore and punk. How did that inform your later work that you do today in terms of Bitcoin and journalism? And how does the punk ethos live in Bitcoin?
Oof, love this. This is like my favorite thing to talk about when it comes to Bitcoin. So for those who don't know, when you hear hardcore or punk rock music, you probably just think like loud people yelling into a microphone sort of thing, playing distorted guitars and blah, blah, blah. It is that to some degree for sure. But it's also sort of a little bit more sophisticated than that below the surface. So that's kind of the aesthetic of it, if you will. Below the surface, there's a deep ethos embedded in it. So, for example, in the New York hardcore scene, there was like the straight edge movement, which was like no drinking, clean living, eating healthy. The vegan movement was a part of that. And I know that in Bitcoin, we shouldn't talk about veganism, but from the sake of like people believing in something and living that life, you had people saying like, I don't think animals should be killed in factory farms, and I'm going to eat vegan as a result of that. Deep ethos, the same way Bitcoin has a deep ethos. But more than that, the night someone described to me what Bitcoin was, it was some first or second week of January 2018. It was like a perfect sort of, top of the bull market conversation. Like, this thing is going to the moon. Meanwhile, it was like already at 20,000 or whatever at that point, the peak for that cycle. But the first thing that I had in mind was, wait. So this thing doesn't belong to like a company. It doesn't belong to the state. And it took me like a minute. I'm like, what other thing have I seen like this? And I'm like, well, the independent music scene. And I'll include, to go beyond punk rock and hardcore, that's hip hop, that's indie rock. So like I came up with seeing a lot of bands that are now huge, like the Death Cab for Cuties of the world, or bands like Against Me, or even amazing hip hop acts that we saw back in New York as early as like the late 90s into the early 2000s. And the whole ethos there was just permissionlessness, right? Put on your own shows, put out your own records. You're not asking for permission. Even the nature of the lyrics and the rhetoric was all just permissionlessness. And nobody owns what hardcore is. So you could say hardcore is a protocol. Punk rock is the protocol, right? And then everybody builds on top of that protocol. But nobody owns punk rock. That's not a thing. The Ramones don't even own punk rock. The Sex Pistols or whatever. The progenitors in the space. And you could say the same thing about hip hop. So forget about talking about this through like a genre specific lens. Probably the same thing about folk music if you go back even further in New York's history and we're there. Think about the genre as the protocol. And that's, I didn't even know that I sort of saw it as this right away that night. But as the first frame of reference I had was like, okay, I had my friend describing this to me. It's kind of difficult to understand, difficult to use. And I'm thinking to myself, there's a lot of excitement around this. This will probably get easier to use and this and that. And the way I used to think about this is like one of the places where you would put on shows if you were booking your own shows as a punk rock band in Jersey where you're from, or Long Island where I'm from, or in the city. Well, more in the suburbs were these things called VFW halls, which are veterans of foreign war halls, veterans of foreign wars. And these are just places where people would meet, have little gatherings, whatever, but they would also rent them out to bands. And so I'm like, we're at like the VFW stage of Bitcoin. It's eventually going to get to like Wembley Stadium and the whatever, but that was my first frame of reference of like, we're at the really weird people in society congregating in these halls or at a bar or in a basement somewhere or whatever, doing this thing. We're outcasts right now. If you believe in this technology, if you think it's going to win. So we're at this stage of it where there's something really special happening, but because it's difficult, think about it like this. If you've ever tried to use Nostr is sort of like early Bitcoin. It's kind of clanky and Bitcoin still is too, but it just kind of feels like this is inconvenient. This is inconvenient and weird. And that's what a lot of like punk rock and hardcore used to be. Now, like most people, when they think about punk rock, maybe it's like, I don't even know what it is these days, but maybe Blink-182 or My Chemical Romance or some of these bands that became popular. I know I'm dating myself by saying this kind of stuff, but I don't even know what the examples these days are. So there was a popularized version of it. I'm not even throwing shade at that. It just became what it became. But there was something very special and very like, when you were at a show at CBGB's, so the club where like basically a lot of punk rock in the US was sort of, it's where the Ramones used to play, hardcore bands like the Cro-Mags and Agnostic Front, these bands in the 80s and the 70s doing really cool stuff. There was an energy to it, but it was very weird, and it was very, literally cypherpunk. They took part of that word, half of that comes from punk. And because Lynn Alden said this best once, she said like these people were like, they were genuinely social outcasts. Cypherpunks were people that, they're behind a computer because they don't like interfacing with the real world. That's a piece of what they're doing. Yeah, they're also privacy advocates and doing this other sort of stuff, but like there's a real sort of like, I don't agree with the mainstream. I'm not a mainstream person. And punk rock had that same thing. I didn't get all this that night in January 2018, but I had this thought of like, that was my first frame of reference, because if you asked me what Austrian economics was in 2018, I couldn't have told you. If you asked me what open source development was in 2018, I could not have told you. I didn't have these frames in my brain yet, but I did have the framework for what does it mean when people come together in an anarchic fashion, to say that word better, almost like anarchy, people coordinating with themselves in a very DIY fashion, working together to do something, to build a music scene, to support bands, to hand out flyers, to print records. And so I saw all that and I was like, Bitcoin, it's just the embodiment of punk rock in terms of money. And I know that might be off-putting to some, where you say, well, how would that become ubiquitous one day? How could punk rock money become ubiquitous? It'll just become a thing. The roots of it are that. The same way the roots of like folk music are that, or early hip hop was that. All of these things were maligned when they started. They were all counterculture at some point. Bitcoin was counterculture at some point. For it to succeed, of course, it can't remain a countercultural thing. But the same way, maybe another way to put this is like, think about it like a religion. The same way that certain like ethos, thou shalt not kill, basic rules of religions will be passed along. I think those things are sort of embedded in Bitcoin's code and deep down embedded in the culture. We see this a little bit more when sort of the tourists leave after the bull markets and the real Bitcoiners stick around. That culture, I think, will live on, and that ethos will be, people won't even realize that it's kind of being imprinted in them. Their life will change because they're using better money. They'll start making different decisions, and they'll begin to embody that ethos without knowing it. And I think the same way that we sort of, I don't really love this word. I was just speaking with Jeff Booth and he used it, but we kind of infect each other, right? We have these you and me, Rob, we have this conversation, you share this podcast, and it's like, okay, now I kind of get how Frank is thinking. Maybe I didn't understand everything he said, but some of what he said really resonated with me. He also doesn't seem like a totally insane human being. I mean, that's up for debate, but it's like, it's like this thing where it's like, it's a slow and steady sort of change, but a big part of it, I think, when it comes to sort of being keepers of the flame, and even with punk rock and these genres, let me think of, there's one band, I think most people would know Turnstile these days. So like Turnstile is a popular kind of punk rock band. Not my favorite thing, but I don't hate them either. I just saw them before the Bitcoin Amsterdam event. I saw them in Amsterdam. Friends, they used to play at VFW halls with a friend of mine, with my friends' bands, and like 13 years ago or whatever it was, like when they first started out. But when I watched them, I'm like, I'm sure if I talked to these guys afterwards, they believe in the punk rock ethos. They're huge. They play to 3,000 people in Amsterdam now, no longer 20 people in a dive bar, but they believe in it and they're carrying that on. It's not the same as it was maybe when it started. And I think that that's essentially what Bitcoin has to be. Bitcoin has to be the Ramones or like Bob Dylan. It'll become a popular thing, but it's still sort of the authentic thing at the same time, if that makes sense.
100%. And I completely agree with you with your punk rock ethos as the foundation of Bitcoin. And when I got heavily involved with the Bitcoin scene in 2020, 2021, there was, I would say, more of that, right? Because I think there was a common enemy for us to fight against. We were going against the tyranny of COVID and the money printing, and that same feeling that I think Bitcoin was birthed out of with Occupy Wall Street and the financial crisis sort of reappeared in 2020, 2021. And now we've won a lot, in 24 and 25. And so that feeling has gone away, but it will always be there. It is the foundation of Bitcoin. And what you brought up before, like say there's this giant privacy leak across the country, right? And something like Bitcoin becomes much more fundamental just to the way that you live and go about your business. Then I think we're going to see a reemergence of that cypherpunk and just punk mentality come back to Bitcoin, which I'm here for. And I think you are too.
Same here. Yeah. And I think it's funny because you and I actually want to say something I really respect, and I know this is going to get my old job mad at me. What you do with Bitcoin news and sort of the longer posts that you make, I really respect that, in that I know you could cut corners. I know you could do that. You could do stuff that easily just sort of, gets engagement, and it's much easier to do and game the algorithm, but you're instead trying to provide people, I think, with really important information in the space, and I respect that. And I think that is the decision everyone needs to make. We can all cut corners, but it's how much do you want to embody this ethos? How much do you want to be the person that carries this thing forward, that represents it in the way that you think it should be represented? And I think that's the big... You're going to be challenged with that. I mean, my own ego, I still have it. It's hanging up in the room next door. Like, I have a pass and a pin code to the White House. Like, what planet are we living on? Like, how is that reality? And I'm not saying I don't deserve it. I was a college professor for 7 years. I've been a journalist for years. I was a journalist in the music business. I'm not saying I don't deserve it, but I say it from the perspective of, like, that very much could have gone to my head, and I could have just said, like, I'm a White House guard. I don't need to focus on this stuff going on in Africa or this or that. But what I felt deep down was that thing I said earlier was like, here I am paying attention to Donald Trump, and it's more than that. Don't get me wrong. I really did care about the right policy coming out. When I really, in my heart, believe that Bitcoin is a story of people around the world adopting it in ways that serve them best. And in my heart, that feels like the thing that I need to help bring to the world. And I would just encourage people to constantly reflect on that. You might get a little bit sidetracked. You might get a little bit lost. And I would say, there are a few things here and there that I've done where I'm like, I got stretched a little bit further in a direction I didn't want to go in that position. But deep down, I know that I believe in Bitcoin as money. I believe everyone in the world should have access to it. And I believe the human story around Bitcoin is the most powerful way to get people to understand it. So I do what is in my power to try to continue to have that be my primary focus. And I encourage everybody to do the same. It'll be a slower burn. You'll need to have a lower time preference as a content creator or a Bitcoin educator or whatever role you end up playing in this space. But at the end of the day, let me put it this way. Like with my podcast, I was doing it for a while before I took on the role at Bitcoin Magazine. I just checked before. I have 222 followers on YouTube. Someone might say to me, like, dude, you were just in the white. Like, what are you doing trying to build a YouTube channel with like people from like, what are you doing? I think this is really important. Every single one person who joins that or who has DM'd me to say like the story really impacted me has made me exponentially happier than any reporting I did from the White House. I'm not saying I don't think I found that I didn't find the reporting from the White House important. And nor did I think it was it was an amazing experience. But when it comes to what I feel like I'm here for, the little things like that bring me so much more joy than some of the things that I think most people looking in might say like, wow, like that must make you the most proud or the most sort of excited. It's not those things. And I just say, listen to yourself when it comes to that kind of stuff. If your mind and your heart continues to bring you back to saying like, this is the role I want to play in the Bitcoin space, play that role. You'll figure out a way to monetize it, but do the thing that feels right to you. Don't cut corners. Be an educator versus an influencer. Be a journalist versus a content creator, if you will. Do you know what I understand? I'm not throwing shade at the other stuff, but like do it with integrity, do it with heart, and really try to sort of, really explain to people what you see in Bitcoin and why you think it's important.
100%. And in speaking with you, it is so clear that you deeply care about Bitcoin. And looking at your output, it is deeply clear that you have great respect for your audience. And I think when you combine the passion for Bitcoin with the respect for the audience, you're going to win. It's just a matter of time. So Frank, thank you so much. That was a really, really powerful conversation and gave a bunch of people something to chew on. So if people want to find out more about your work, your Substack, your podcast, where should they go?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you again for having me on, Rob. I really quickly want to say this. I spent so many years making music, writing, doing a ton of things that no one paid attention to. So the fact that you asked me to come on this and that I get to do these sorts of things, it really means the world to me. So I appreciate that. For my Substack, you can find me frankcorva.substack.com. I'm actually leaning more into sort of like people's psychology, helping them get through the bear market, especially newbies. So if you're a newbie and you want someone, this is my third bear market, to sort of help walk you through what this is like, maybe some of the psychology necessary to get through it, that's a little bit of what I'm doing there. With New Renaissance Capital, you could just Google, I think it's New Renaissance Capital with Frank Corva on all the podcast platforms. Shout out to Fountain. I just recently started putting my stuff through Fountain, or syndicating my RSS feed through them. And so you could watch the videos on Fountain as well now. YouTube, New Renaissance Capital. And I think that's about it. And then find me on Nostr. I'm a big Nostr fan. It feels very punk rock to me. I really, really like it. If you just put in my name on Primal, Damus, Amethyst, any of the bigger clients, you should be able to find me. But get over to Nostr. If you're a musician or if you're a content creator, forget about Bitcoin, whatever, like start putting it out through Wavelake, which is a Nostr client for music. Start doing all that kind of stuff. Like Nostr is punk rock, P2P, human to human connections. The more energy the more we move our time and energy over into things like Bitcoin and Nostr, I think the more value we'll end up not only creating for others, but also getting back ourselves.
All right. Well, you just fired everybody up. Go on those platforms. Check out Frank, and I'll see you at PubKey, man. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you could drop a like and a share, it would help in our mission to accelerate adoption. If you're looking for more Bitcoin signal, join over 10,000 readers of our newsletter, Bitcoin News Weekly. Every Monday morning, we send out the biggest headlines of Bitcoin to keep you in the know in under 5 minutes. Links below in the description. Then come hang with us live every Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern. We break it all down live on stream with a new guest, and you can add your 2 sats in the chat. See you next week.